This is Greg Pass with the Americans in Wartime Experience. Today's date is October the 15th, 2022, and I am in Virginia Beach, and I have the pleasure to sit down with Eric Fort. How you doing, Eric?
Doing well,
What's your full name, Eric?
Eric Parker Bryce Fort.
And where are you from?
Birmingham, Alabama.
And where were you born at?
Birmingham, Alabama.
So
Didn't travel too far.
I was about to say. Well, the Marine Corps gave you a little travel.
It did. Oddly enough, I tell everybody I joined the Marine Corps to get out of Mississippi. So I graduated from high school there. So I joined the Marine Corps, thought I'd see the world on their dime, but went back to Birmingham. So never really left home.
That's it. So why are you in Virginia Beach?
I came up for the National League of Families POWMIA workshop, Southeast Regional workshop. It's my first time to attend, new member. And my dad's case back in '94 was closed, or it was closed essentially because of where his casualty occurred. And so we've gathered some more information. So my goal was to come, number one, and connect with others like me, but then also to see if there's other things that we can do to look at potentially revisit my dad's incident and case and see if there's further things we could do to possibly investigate what occurred.
So your father, what's your father's name?
Eric Bryce.
And what branch of service?
He was a Navy pilot.
And what did he fly?
He flew F-4s off the USS America, VF-33.
And so he was an officer then?
He was.
And what rank?
Lieutenant.
Do you know why he entered the military service?
I don't. I wasn't fortunate enough to meet my dad. He was killed about a month before I was born. I think, like a lot of us, my dad grew up in a family who had served, and so I think it was just kind of one of those things that you just sort of do. I don't know the actual answer, but I know he always loved the military growing up. Mm-hmm. So I think it was just kind of a goal of his to try to serve. He loved to fly, loved planes, cars, so it's just kind of a natural fit.
So you said the F-4.
Yes.
Tell us what you know about the F-4. Is it the crew? Is it a one-seat?
Yeah. So he flew the F-4J. There's a number of different letters at the end of F-4. Unfortunately, I don't know the difference in each one. His was a fighter, so I do know there was two versions. One was a fighter, one was a reconnaissance, and he actually flew the fighter. It was a two-seat. His Rio at the time of the incident was Lieutenant J.G. Simmons, Bill Simmons. So he was a two-seater, but he was the pilot and had flown a number of missions prior to coming into this particular date, and he had over 100 carrier arrests. So he had some experience on the boat more than once.
So how long was he in the service prior to deployment to Vietnam?
So his initial enlistment was in 1965. So obviously he had his initial training, and then went to Pensacola and Meridian for flight training, and then in 1966, I believe, was when he was assigned to his first deployment with the America, 66, 67. They did a med cruise that year, and then came back to Virginia Beach, and then in '68 went back to Vietnam.
Let's go back a little bit. So let's talk a little bit about your family.
Okay.
You have brothers, sisters?
I'm an only child on my mom's side. My mom remarried when I was 3, so I had obviously a stepdad and a stepbrother and stepsister. Mm-hmm. But I was the only one with my mom and dad.
Okay. So obviously. You were not a part of this, but do you know how your mother was notified that he has been unaccounted for?
She received a Western Union telegram.
Really?
Yeah.
A telegram?
Yeah.
Wow.
No casualty officer, no, and I'm not sure. I know at the time, in speaking to other family members like me, there was a number of different ways that they were notified. I found out, and speaking to one this week during this workshop, that they were notified the driver was a bread truck driver because there was concerns about, men in uniform, the white car, the chaplain, all that. And apparently where they lived, there was some demonstration. So from a safety perspective, not only for the officers, but for the family, they were notified via Western Union telegram from a bread truck. So I don't know how it was delivered to my mom, but I do know it was Western Union.
Wow. So what do you know about the circumstances for that your father was lost?
So they'd been on station a couple of weeks. Everybody was sort of acclimating to the day-to-day life. They'd had a few missions over the beach, but hadn't really seen anything. On 4 June, they had their debriefing, as they always do. And apparently everyone was attentive. Everyone was prepared. Questions were asked and answered. So about 12:30, they took off. They were the second of 3. Root Beer 204 was their call sign, and so they went.
Root beer.
Root Beer 204. And oddly enough, I've hated root beer my entire life, and I didn't really know why until I found out what his call sign was, and then I realized it's probably got a little something to do with it, but never been a fan of it. But yeah, Root Beer 204 was their call sign. They were the second one in, made a successful bombing mission. They were trying to take out a bridge at an intersection on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. As they came off, they felt a thump. And it was communication between my dad and his Rio.
When you say when they came off,
they came off target, I'm sorry. So they dropped their bombs, everything appeared to hit on target, and then they were headed back out to sea, back to the carrier. And shortly after coming off target, they felt a thump. So there was some communication back and forth. They were checking the chaff doors to see if maybe they were not completely open, or there was an issue with that. There wasn't. And then immediately the Rio started to notice that there was some hydraulic issues, some pressure issues. As they continued to egress towards the sea. And my dad had always told my mom, and this was kind of the rule with many pilots, you don't eject over land. They're going to capture you. There's a potential of, we all know the issue behind that, right? So the whole thing was get over water. Let's get wet. We've got a better chance of being saved there than we do over land. So they were headed that direction, and the plane was stuck at full throttle. My dad was communicating back and forth with Bill. Once they got over sea, Bill said, it looks like our hydraulics are completely gone. And my dad said, I have no more stick control. So at that point, he was keeping the plane level with rudder controls. Their wingman is adjacent to them at this point, and they're following with them. They're at about 500 to 550 knots and roughly 9 to 10,000 feet elevation. As they get out over sea, my dad realizes that that we're going to have to ditch this, and at some point he tells Bill, I've done all I can do. Get out, eject, eject, eject. And so Bill ejected. He sustained a broken arm, several other injuries from the ejection. Eventually came down. There's an audio tape of it. Took him, he said, about 5 or 6 minutes, he thinks, to come down. Was rescued and taken to a nearby destroyer. In the meantime, my dad's wingman is flying adjacent to him, and there's a couple of things that come off of the plane. I'm not 100% sure exactly what they did or their purpose, but apparently when they came off, it related to the fact that it's probably electrical issues at this point. About that time, the right wing caught on fire. The plane began to roll to the left and went almost directly into the ocean. Immediately, obviously search and rescue was sent out. They searched for a number of hours. They found some debris of the plane. They found some of what they believe may have been some of my dad's survival gear. And at that point, they said, there's no way. He went down with the aircraft. There was no survival. You had the eyewitness of his wingman who didn't see him eject. The area that they covered during that time, they certainly would have hopefully found him or seen his parachute or something. So there was pretty good certainty that he didn't make it out and that he went down with the plane.
Any theory as to how he wasn't able to eject?
There's a lot of speculation. Most believe that when this particular pylon came off and there was an electrical problem, that may have been what kept him from being able to pull the or have the ejection actually fire. Yeah, at one point I asked a question, and it's been mentioned in an audio tape that I have. Well, why didn't Bill punch him out? Oftentimes if one's busy or something, you'll see another one potentially eject both. And they had an agreement that if they were in this type of scenario, they wouldn't do that because most likely it could potentially kill the other if they ejected them, and they weren't prepared. So Bill didn't obviously do that because of the agreement that they'd had with one another.
So Bill, have you met Bill?
As a young child, I did. He and my mom communicate still. He and I haven't had much communication, if any, really. I respect it. Mm-hmm. I respect it.
Gotcha. So, losing a loved one has got to be very tough, especially in your circumstances where you never met your father.
Yeah.
What is that like growing up in that type of circumstance, and what kind of challenges does the family face especially when your dad was not recovered?
Yeah, I guess one of the benefits for my mom is that because she was pregnant with me, she had come back to Birmingham from Virginia Beach to have the support of my grandparents when I was born. So my mom had that immediate support mechanism there. Obviously, at some point, she had to go back to Virginia Beach and move everything home. It was Vietnam. Growing up in the South, you didn't talk about it. It was not a popular war, obviously. So there was a lot of things that you just kind of put in a bottle, pushed under the rug, and you never really talked about. I guess I was pretty lucky. I grew up in an area where if there were protests, I don't recall. If there was a lot of negativity towards family, I was young enough, I didn't recall that. I was in high school. I had couple of comments made, in relation to, your dad deserved to die. People that didn't agree with the war. That was probably the hardest one that hit home. For me, it wasn't until I was in probably my 40s that I really started to struggle the most in how do I deal with this? Being a Desert Storm veteran, we never went overseas. When we came home, we had a parade. We had, family and friends wanted to have parties and get-togethers. And in the back of my mind, while I was very appreciative of all that, in the back of my mind, I thought, people like my dad never had that. They oftentimes didn't want to wear uniforms home, just so them and their loved ones wouldn't be threatened. And so that, as I got older, that really began to weigh on me more and more emotionally. And then, of course, you're in the late 60s, the early to mid 70s. You didn't really talk about mental health or PTSD or the mental struggles that come with loss like that. You might have been in a hospital somewhere if you did, and we didn't have the benefit of some of the resources back then as far as nonprofit organizations or groups that focus on helping kids and family members through those struggles. So you kind of did it on your own, and you just sort of figured out what worked for you, and that's how you get through day to day.
So what has the U.S. government done, and what are they continue to do to help recover the men and women who are MIA?
So specific to my dad's case, well, let me back up. So DPAA is an agency that's a part of the Department of Defense, and they are the ones that actually work with a number of different entities to work with Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos to recover as many of the remains as they possibly can. There's still 1,582 to date that are missing or unaccounted for. And so they're a huge resource for not only dealing with the political climate that can change and helping move the pieces for that, But they also have the budget and the resources to work with the archaeologists and private groups and educational institutions that have professors and departments that specialize in either archaeological digs or technology that's now available that wasn't many years ago. So specific to our case, in 1993, 1994, the government said any water loss that was 2 miles or greater, there's no way we could recover it. So we're going to, essentially not close the cases, but they're not going to be of a direct focus for us anymore. Since that time, obviously there's a lot of technology differences or tools that we have that we didn't have back then, side sonar and a number of different things that can scan and map the bottom. So DPAA is now looking to reopen cases like incidents like my dad's, where he's at a water depth of less than 100 feet. It's been some time, but as we look and see some of the things that we're finding from Civil War era, from World War I, World War II, we're a short timetable from when the incident occurred to potential recovery versus some of the others that have been underwater for many years. And so DPAA is now reevaluating those, looking to see how many may be in certain areas and how can they begin to look to open those cases and get as much as they can in certain areas.
Especially when I make the assumption that it was a pretty good idea where he went in. I mean, with the eyewitness from the other pilot, and I mean, they know a pretty good idea where estimate or
yes and no. So if you look at the coordinates, we have 3 different coordinates, GPS coordinates of where it occurred. The first one's off the deck log of the day the incident occurred. The second one is a different translation of that same coordinate. And then another one is off the SAR log, the search and rescue log of the helicopter that was out that day. The first 2 are about 5.5 miles apart. The others are 8.5 miles apart. So when you say you're looking, anybody that's ever done side sonar, just because you have a coordinate, it's a starting point. And it's when you're mapping the ocean, it's truly a needle in a haystack. Well, now we don't even know if we have 3 haystacks and 3 needles.
Yeah.
So
how far off the coast?
Roughly anywhere from about 8.5 to 15 miles, depending on which coordinate that you look at.
Mm-hmm. So where, in relation to land, is there a town or a city that's near the coast?
Vin is the closest big city, I guess. Vin, V-I-N-H. That's probably the closest large city to where this occurred. Now there are, from what I understand, there's a number of smaller fishing villages and things as you go down the coastline, but as far as a bigger city, that would be the closest one.
Gotcha. So when we started the interview, we talked a little bit. You're here for this. You have a lot of people, your peers, if you will, that are missing loved ones. Tell us a little bit about the organization and what kind of services do they provide to people like you.
So the National League of Families was started, over 50 years ago by a woman and her dad. Ann's brother was missing. Through all these years, and I believe it was 2018, her brother has since been accounted for. For her, it didn't stop. She continued the mission and does to this day, and has been a valuable resource. So she has worked through, obviously, a number of different presidents, a number of different directors within DPAA. That particular organization has changed names. It's never changed its mission, but the names and some of the things that they were doing over the years has changed just a little bit as far as mission focus. Most of that has been because of the politics of the climate where they're in. Again, you're talking about Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. All 3 don't necessarily agree, and all 3 don't necessarily communicate with one another as to what the other is doing. each one is autonomous. So the National League of Families has been pivotal to work with not only the federal government, but with DPAA, obviously being an entity of that, and working through some of that climate to help navigate. From a service perspective, they're really just a huge resource of knowledge and experience and arms, if you will, of ways to go about continuing the investigation of a loved one's case, and bringing in experts and digging deeper and kind of peeling back the onion a bit. If we've exhausted this layer, what's the next layer that we can do? There's got to be information. So yeah, I would consider kind of an on-job experience that we've learned a lot. I say we as the organization has learned a lot of information over the years, and trying to correlate those dots and being a repository for some of that information. The big thing that they do is make sure that we don't forget that there's 1,582 POW and missing and unaccounted for that still aren't home yet, just from Vietnam. There's tens of thousands of others from World War II, World War I, but our focus is specific to the Vietnam War.
So we had a couple interviews before you, all of which the family member that was killed was in an aircraft. Is that what you see a lot of that from your peers and a lot of these aviators, or people that were infantry guys?
There's most of the people that I've interacted with most commonly are aircraft losses. I think those are a little bit more difficult because, the time of day or night, the accuracy of information that we've received from other resources. Like in the case of my dad, 3 different coordinates. No one necessarily wrote it down wrong, but there's just some misinformation between that. So where do you start and how do you move to the next step? I think in ground-based offensives, it's obviously a little bit easier. You know pretty close to where an event happened, but there's a case right now that we were talking about earlier today where someone's loved one was killed in a rice paddy. The problem is this rice paddy's huge, and so you can't just go in and dig up an entire rice paddy to determine where that is. So I think it's probably a little of both. My interaction seems to be more with people from aircraft, and I think it's just by happen chance, not any specific reason.
Yeah. So obviously we're videotaping this right now. In a few weeks we're going to send you a copy of the video. We're also going to send you instructions on how you can submit your story to the Library of Congress Veterans History Project.
Okay.
Theoretically, that video will be there for hundreds of years, and one of your great grandkids might stumble upon the video. What would you want them to know about your father?
That one's hard for me because I never knew my dad. A lot of my peers were young children, so they have some vague memories up to, in their teens or maybe even older, and not necessarily children. I met a lady for the first time. She was 26 when her brother was killed. And so there's people that were adults. And she's 82 now, still seeking answers. So for me, sadly, I wasn't fortunate enough to know my dad, to have those experiences that I could pass along. I was given stories about my dad from family. He loved cars, he loved planes. He grew up in a small farm town not too far from here in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. Was a pretty big prankster from what my cousins would tell me. His aunt and uncle raised him, so he had 3 cousins, all girls, younger than him, but they essentially were his sisters. So they've shared a lot of stories over the years of how he would pick on them a little bit, and as I'm sure he needed to with 3 girls in the house. When he got in trouble, he'd run through the fields and the woods to his other aunt's house for safety. So probably not a lot different than their great-great-great-grandfather, who, whatever I may be at that point in time, right? But I think another thing that's important to remember is he received the Distinguished Flying Cross. So he, because he got the aircraft out to sea, because he, built or told Bill to eject, he saved his life. And for that, his heroism, he was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. So he paid the ultimate price. We hear people talk about selfless service and service for others, and not leaving anyone behind, and going above and beyond. You could check every box. That's what my dad did. But at the end of the day, he paid the ultimate price. He gave his life so another guy could make it home. I think that's important for them to remember and to know.
Your dad play a role in your enlistment?
I think so. I think, in the back of my mind, I think a little bit of it was trying to pick up where he left off. Obviously, two totally different routes. I was in a field artillery unit. He's a pilot. Again, I grew up in a family that had served. So to me, irregardless of what happened to my dad, irrespective of the fact I did or didn't have to serve, whatever that was, just grew up in a family where you serve. If you're capable and able, people choose military service, and so I did that. As I've gotten older, part of it makes me wonder, am I chasing ghosts? Am I trying to prove something or do something different to honor him? I think at the end of the day, he would have been proud either way.
Well, on behalf of the Americans in Wartime Experience, I thank you for spending time with us. Thank you
thank
for your
you guys.
service. Thank you for your family service. It's great to meet you. Good job.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate you guys and what you do to get the family and the stories out there.